The following video illustrates formative assessment techniques used by the Hatboro-Horsham High School teachers.
Formative assessment is really a common sense approach to teaching, but it's one of those things where there's a million different ways to do it. There are so many techniques, and this year through our differentiated supervision we've been really kind of learning a lot of those techniques, but a lot of them are common sense. It really is taking the pulse of your class a lot more frequently than you would in a maybe more traditional standard teaching setting. And it's just little stuff from saying, hey, thumbs up if you're with me. You're still with me, that's good. Having them work with partners and then having the partners share out so the kid doesn't feel like it's like individually on me, whether I don't have it or maybe I do have it. The pressure is lessened. But then also by having them do stuff like this, you really are taking that pulse. I tried something different though, and it's not in the quote-unquote formative handbook, but the idea behind it is. And it's using Twitter, it's using social media to make sure that what they're doing is using the relevance and using some of the Odyssey, the book that's 3,300 years old, that story, and really understanding that you can now get your messages out by trying to teach condensing writing style. So the techniques I use, not all of them are on that list that you get from the formative assessment coaches, but the technique is there, and it seemed to work. Does anyone know the word condensed? What does the word condensed mean, David? Small space, okay? AJ? Packed into. I like that. Let's go with that one for a second. What if you could take your thoughts and rather than spending 2 or 3 sentences or 4 or 5 sentences, you could pack it into a smaller space? Make sense? That's what Twitter's good for. Twitter then became the vehicle to try to learn how to condense your writing. And as I told the kids in class, when you learn how to condense your sentence, you're so used to making a paragraph 4 or 5 sentences. But what's the real meat of that? What's really in the writing that you really need? If you could learn how to condense it, rather than water it down, but really make it much more focused on the intent of the writing and the good stuff in it, Twitter forces you to do that. It's 140 characters or less. You have to really concentrate on the good stuff. So I said you got to use either a life lesson and a metaphor. You have to have it relevant to you now and create a tweet. And then just made a point system based on that. As you get the ideas, if they're relevant and they're using the Odyssey, the stuff that's 3,300 years old, tweet at will. Send me that stuff at will. As long as you're hashtagging it the right way, as long as I'm tagged in it, if it's good enough, you get points. Part of that formative process is to model good work, to model success for them, so they can see right in front of them what the end result when it's done perfectly or near perfectly looks like. So modeling that for them is part of that formative assessment. It has that, again, that constant check and balance and kind of teaching through that. I'm going to put the Twitter up. We're going to watch it happen live. I will then grade it live right in front of you. Because remember, if it makes sense, if it does this formula, you get 1 point. It's all in your packets. If I favored it, 2 points. If I retweet it, 3 points. I'm not going to wait till tomorrow to tell you that it's good. I want you to work on it instantly. So seconds after they hit it, I'm on it, I'm telling them, try it again. Within 5 minutes, they got it. The old way of doing it? Well, yeah, okay, we'll get back to it tomorrow. It's lost. It's gone. Right now, it's in the moment, and they just learned it, and they walked out the door with it. Be only yourself and nothing else. Otherwise, you'll be seen as the wrong you. James, no. And why? What's it missing? There's nothing going back to the story. Right. All right, so go ahead and fix it and then redo it. Good. I'm glad you're seeing it. You've got to have part of the story. I love the advice, James. The advice is very, very good. But I need something to attach it to the actual 3,300-year-old text. If you can take something like the Odyssey that's 3,300 years old and you can make it relevant to them today, that is probably one of the most important things. The theme of the literature doesn't change. The author's intention of the literature doesn't change. So in this class, we're focusing on those things and what you get out of it that you can take forward. 10 years from now, it's not important that you can spit back at me what was on page 50 of chapter 4. I don't care about that. I care that you understand that the themes and the relationship of character to another character, because if you get it in the novel, you may get it in life. To me, that's the learning. So to do that, you gotta then make sure that you can mix it up with them. Have them work through technology to get those things. Have them use something they're gonna use anyway. Most of these kids, if not all these kids, have a Twitter account anyway. So it took some learning on my point to say, all right, what is Twitter, how does it work? How do I use it for them? Bingo. Now I'm using it for them, and it's still English. I think it has to be a balance. I think you have to absolutely know your content first. You as a teacher are the expert in the classroom. You have to know why Shakespeare invented 30,000 words, why those words then transformed the English language. You have to know Homer, this was a myth. This is a legend. It carries on because humanity hasn't changed. You've got to know that before you can spice it up with this. If you just spice it up with technology and don't know your content, well now, what are you pitching to them? They're not going to buy what you're selling because guess what? You don't know your stuff. There's always a place for you to be the master of your classroom and know your content. Then, based on that mastery, now you learn the new and exciting ways to use that stuff, that technology in your classroom so it relates to the kids even more.
You're going to give your opinion based on what you read in the first box.
High school science teacher Maria Simon used the Carousel Formative Assessment strategy to help assess her students' understanding of the Endangered Species Act.
The law that they were looking at both that day and previous to that day was the Endangered Species Act. So leading into that day's class, they used one of the library applications resources to read several articles that both supported the idea of the Endangered Species Act being effective at protecting species, and then some evidence saying it maybe wasn't the most effective strategy in law at protecting species. You'll get your classmates' paper, you'll read what they wrote in box 1, and you're gonna do exactly what it says for box 2, which is to read their response and add another reason to support theirs.
The Carousel strategy is a common assessment tool for teachers looking to help students understand two sides of an issue. It is designed to engage dialogue and debate in the classroom.
I thought it suited this particular activity because I really just wanted to get their opinion, but I wanted some concrete background and supporting evidence for those opinions. This allowed them to communicate that. But not just with me with like an independent writing piece. They were able to communicate it in groups and then out loud with the class.
To implement her strategy, Maria divided the classroom into groups of 4, matching the 4 boxes on the handout sheet. The first 2 students in each group wrote reasons why the Endangered Species Act is effective. The last 2 students wrote in their boxes reasons why the Endangered Species Act is not effective.
So it was kind of forcing them to evaluate both sides of it based on the background that they had obtained through the articles. I liked that there was a written thought process down on paper where they had to go back into what they read and provide evidence from it, like with a written paper, but I also like that they were able to kind of look at each other's viewpoints. I'm gonna just use a popsicle sticks to get a few of you to share out your thoughts. Basically what you're sharing is just basically a summary or maybe a pretty powerful piece of the paper that you ended up with, so the one that's in front of you right now.
The second piece to Maria's formative assessment strategy is a popular one among Hatboro-Horsham teachers and not so popular among its students. The strategy is cold calling by using popsicle sticks.
The popsicle sticks that I use just as a quick reporting method, it's called cold calling. A lot of teachers do it in different methods. The students like and don't like the popsicle sticks. I think they like it because they know to be on their toes at that point when you go to pull out that method that anybody could get called on. So that's kind of a good kind of heads up to them, I think. And a lot of teachers are using it, so I think they're kind of getting used to that whole method.
There are plenty of new formative assessment strategies being introduced to our teachers this year. They must choose the right technique for their classroom. The end result is to help teachers help students achieve success.
It does help in terms of just checking in on where they are, which again is always helpful, and we're always trying to come up with ways in order to do that better so that we can provide the help we need before some sort of big test or assessment comes. We want to try to figure out what those weak areas are and kind of help the students identify those weak areas before they have a test in front of them.
If you haven't yet, what I wanted you to do as you come in is your entrance ticket. You know, starting tomorrow you have your speeches, right, about your SSR books, and your letters could be starting to be due tomorrow, right, because those are due on the day that you give your speech. So if you have a question still about it, please just jot it down for me. We started off with entrance tickets. So as soon as they came in, there was a question on the board and they had to respond to it. And I chose that one because they have an assignment that we've been working on most of the semester, but it's due tomorrow. So it seemed like a good way to see if there were any last minute questions in an anonymous way, so students didn't have to, raise their hand if they, didn't want to be called out on something. It was also just a very quick way to get through questions because a lot of students had similar types of questions, so I was able just to quickly look through them and answer the 1 or 2 questions there were. Are the letters due the same day as our individual speeches? Yes, okay? So you hand in your letter on the day that you are giving your speech. So everybody who is signed up for tomorrow, you should be emailing me your letter tomorrow. Right, over to camera, see how far you get. Oh, excellent. We also used a strategy called bounce, bounce, pass, where we threw the ball around. And in that, it's a formative assessment because students get to share out their response to the question, and that question was about what kind of poems they remembered reading. But it also is kind of an active listening strategy because it requires that they're listening to the person before them, because they're asked to just quickly, in their own words, restate what that person said before they add on their comment. And so I chose that with that one because I wanted to make sure that they were hearing what each other was sharing out, and a lot of times once they heard what one student said, you noticed more hands going up, more people who wanted the opportunity to share because they were reminded, or they're like, oh yeah, I remember reading that, or so they were able to start to share and bounce ideas off of each other. Jenna, can you read out for your group your composite answer for number 1? Throughout, we used, cold calling or random calling using the popsicle sticks, hoping to get more students engaged and to keep them engaged the whole time. They always know that it's a possibility that they could come up to have to answer a particular question or to share out. Again, just trying to keep all students engaged the whole time. And the last one, which was the new one I tried this time, was best composite answer, where the students had gone through and already come up with their own individual answer, and then they were asked to work together with a group to come up with their best answer as a group. So what that means, right, is that you're putting together your ideas to come up with maybe a better answer to the question than anybody had on their own. It's formative because I got to see quickly on the Post-it notes exactly what each student was thinking in regards to those questions, and then it also allowed them to kind of self-check each other and come up with perhaps a better answer, add to give more detail about things. For example, what is poetry? Maybe things they hadn't thought about before. Their group members could add, so they were able to kind of edit and revise their answers and put them all together. Are songs like poetry or not? Okay, and this is our last one. Let's see, Eva, can you read for your group?
We said yes because they both express emotions and sound good, or I guess flowy.
Flow to them and express emotions. Since January, I've been actively using them and trying to embed it into every lesson as much as possible. And I think it's helpful. I think it really helps me keep students more engaged in lots of different ways, because it's asking them individually to do a lot of things that I'm checking very quickly, but it's also helping me realize what they know and what we don't need to spend as much time on, or it can also help if it seems like a large number of students aren't getting something, or there's a big hole in the answers that I'm getting overall, then I know we need to go back and look at that, or I need to ask more specific probing questions to help them think about some of those concepts a little bit more.
And you're going to come up with what's called the best composite answer. So out of the 3 of you, take the best pieces or the best points that you have, and you are going to type type up or write up neatly. We could do write up neatly for this. One answer that is each group's answer. I use best composite answer, which is essentially a way of taking what they all did on their own. So I assign them a homework assignment, and by bringing them in and having them share their homework assignments with each other, they're using formative assessment to essentially get their answers out to each other and then evaluate each other. And then by doing that, they have to composite or combine their answers together. You can type it or you can handwrite it. What do you want to do? Typing it? That's fine. Typing's easier.
Which ones are we going to use? The ones underlined? Yeah. Okay.
I hope to accomplish by that is the kids, when they understand something, they can explain it to the other student, or maybe they get a different view on something, and by putting together their best composite answer, gives them a better understanding of the topic, rather than me just talking to them about, oh, this was your homework, this was your homework. What's nice is it gets everybody involved, so anybody who didn't do their homework, I don't often check a lot of homework for points or anything like that. So if they didn't do it, they're caught, they're stuck, they don't understand it as well. So it makes everybody, unfortunately, all 12 people today seem to have done their homework, but it makes everybody participate and share. It's also an easy way for me to go around from table to table while they're doing it and check their understanding, which is what I was doing today. To show me that you guys understand transcription and translation, you need to do, as a group, page 9, 10, and 11. Now, I'd like you to just at least start on page 9. But in order to transcribe it and translate it, you need to use a codon chart. But you're not going to use this codon chart. You're going to use a specialized codon chart, which is on page 11. The second activity that I did is essentially a modified version of find and fix your mistake. And so what the students have to do is they have to show me they understand the material by transcribing and translating a section of DNA that forms a sentence. And they know if they made a mistake because the sentence makes no sense. But if they didn't make a mistake and they do it right, then they can do a sentence that makes them do something kind of funny. And so it's fun, it keeps the kids interactive, but it also lets me know right away if they understand. Because if they don't understand, the sentence makes no sense, they don't do what the instructions in the sentence say. And if it does make sense, then they're kind of making a fool of themselves, but having fun in the process.
Today, I'm going to tell you about 2 formative assessment strategies that will encourage students to take control of their writing skill development while making grading easier for you as the teacher. Every teacher, or at least every English teacher, has experienced that moment when you hand back to a student an essay on which you've written the most helpful comments. As a teacher, you you expect that your students will read every last word of these comments and learn from their mistakes. Except then reality happens, and your dreams fade away as you watch that student glance at their grade and then chuck the paper in the trash. This is why I started using the strategies of commenting using abbreviations and codes and delayed grading. First, when my students write an essay, they submit it to turnitin.com, which is a fabulous service our school district pays for. If you're unaware of it, it's a great service right here. Each kid gets a copy of my abbreviations right here. And if you wish to use this on a printed version of the paper, it works just as fine as well too. When I comment on student writing, instead of writing the same long comment over and over again, I merely write an abbreviation or code, as you can see right here. The students receive this, and they know exactly what my code system is. You can make up your own code system or do what I do, which is use a combination of Turnitin's abbreviations, since Turnitin does have their own, and my own uploaded codes. So when I grade a student's paper, I merely just drag the codes onto their paper. You could also, like I said, if this is a printed version, you could write the codes on the paper, but it's much easier just to quickly write an abbreviation versus an entire long sentence. And at the end, I have some codes 1 through 7 that are just general comments. For example, maybe I want the student to read the paper aloud because there's so many grammatical errors. I can just drag them at the end. And the kids will have to then look on my code sheet to see what the codes mean and decipher their grade. When I have finished a class set of essays, I tell the students that they will only receive their numerical grade if they view their comments first. When they view their essays online, or when they receive their essay in paper form, if you choose to have students submit a printed version, they receive them with only my abbreviation or codes on them, no rubric or no numerical grade. If the students submit their essays to turnitin.com, I can see that they've checked their comments, which is why I love using this service. You can see right here who has viewed the comments and which students haven't. If I hand a printed version out, I usually provide them with 3 days to examine the comments before giving the rubric back with their numerical grade. Now, you might think that a student would still merely just ignore the comments and wait for the numerical grade. However, most students, being obsessed with their grade, decipher the comments, or at least try to, in order to determine what grade they're receiving. It's like a puzzle for them. The nice thing is that in our grade book, we have the ability to set a publishing date for any assignment. So when I hand back an essay with my comments, I usually set PowerSchool to delay publishing the grade. This way the grade is already in my grade book, but the students cannot see it. So you can set it on a specific date, or maybe you want to set it, a couple of days after the paper is due. But if you still set published scores, then it's still part of the final grade, which is nice. I found that both delayed grading and commenting with codes or abbreviations have helped my students really focus on becoming better writers, but it's also allowed me to know that they have definitely received my feedback, which of course I consider valuable.
We need you to have a couple of things on your desk. You need to have a textbook, and you also need to have the stoplight cards. What we're going to be doing is getting into groups of 3. If there is an uneven number, we'll get into, some of you will have a group of 5. We have 4 quotes that we selected from Act 2. They are quotes from Friar Lawrence. For today's lesson, we were having the student interpret lines from the play Romeo and Juliet, and our students typically have trouble interpreting Shakespeare's language. So what we did was we used the stoplight in order to let them know that we would be available to help support them whatever level they needed. Well, once it's fired and the gunpowder is used, what happens? It's gone. And so that's what he's warning them about their love. Good, so just put it in your own words. That sounds good. It's my personal nature to kind of go around and ask, are you okay? Are you doing okay? And I think for some students, they see that as more of an annoying thing. So the students who didn't need my help were on green and they did fine, and they asked each other questions, which was good. And then the other students who knew they were in trouble flipped it over to yellow or red and knew that we would be there to support or guide whatever they needed us to do. What's he saying to Romeo about their love right now? They're moving way too fast, okay? So it says, what does the friar do that's contradictory to that advice?
He's telling them that they're moving too fast when he marries them.
Exactly. It's simple. He's saying you're going too fast, too fast, too fast. You're pushing it, pushing it. Okay, let's get married. You ready? For the lesson today, we decided to use the stoplight, something called take and pass, and also the use of the popsicle sticks to call names at random. We had an activity planned where the students were going to be rotating a piece of paper where they would be adding comments. And so the first student attempted to fill out or complete the first row of information, and then as they passed, they had to utilize each other's information from the previous row. They also were engaged with each other and working in groups of 3 or 4 so that they could communicate with one another. And the final thing that we used to engage in student participation was the cold calling with the use of, we have tickets in a cup with all the students' names on it, and we just pulled them at random. Instead of waiting for the same few students to answer questions, we pull them at random. And so they're used to that. They're used to using the stoplight and the popsicle sticks. We use that on a regular basis.
This is actually a really good activity to get you to think not just what you believe, but also looking at the other perspective as well. I was teaching a 9th and 10th grade honors U.S. history course, and we used the formative assessment strategy of the debate team Carousel, which students before The previous night for homework, the students had read an article about Franklin Roosevelt and his first 100 days in office. You're going to respond to this prompt at the top. So you see it says, Franklin D. Roosevelt changed the role of the federal government and fixed many economic problems during his first 100 days in office. The debate team Carousel is a really good way to get kids to think, look at the issue from both perspectives, because the way it works is students respond individually first to what they think about the prompt, and then they pass their paper to someone else in their group who then adds a supporting argument to the original response. They then pass the paper to another person in their group who then has to add an opposing argument. So even if they don't, even if they agree with the previous arguments, they're forced to look at the issue from a different perspective. For the third box, you want to add an opposing argument. Whether you agree or disagree, it doesn't matter. You want to read the first two arguments and then you want to give the opposite side. All right, so this is kind of forcing you to maybe, argue a position that's different than the one you might naturally have. Once they add an opposing argument, then they pass it over to a fourth person who puts in his 2 cents or her 2 cents as well. So when they're finished, then they get a complete look at both sides of the issue. And it provides a lot of discussion opportunities too for the students as they work in their groups. I'll pull out a popsicle stick and ask one of you to respond. Olivia.
I agreed, and I said that he brought the country back together and gave hope to citizens.
What we did was we monitor, as they're in their groups, monitor their answers, monitor the group work, and then we had a full class discussion using the popsicle stick method as well to see what their responses were and to see how they could build off of one another. The critics on the right, the conservative critics, what do you think they would criticize Roosevelt about with all these programs, these government programs? Why might they criticize him? Too much government, exactly. Guys, you're hearing a lot of the same things today, all right? Especially when you talk about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. A lot of critics on the right are criticizing Obama because there's too much government. It's kind of funny, if you listen to some of the criticisms of Roosevelt, you hear the same things about Obama a lot of times. He's a communist, he's a socialist. They were leveling those criticisms at Roosevelt back in the day. And so there's that argument that he's doing too much. Why do you think he was criticized by people on the left? By the liberals? Why do you think they were criticizing Roosevelt? You don't have to give me specifics, you can just kind of do it in a general sense. Yeah, not doing enough. Even if they disagree on the basic arguments, at least they understand both sides of the argument. And then we use that then as sort of a springboard to examine in more detail Roosevelt's policies and how he changed the government, which eventually with our summative assessment will be a unit test or an essay prompt where they have to address the same issue. Lauren, where are you? Where's Lauren? There you are. The popsicle stick thing we can use every day in class pretty much to keep kids engaged, to keep them on their toes that they might be called on. And the carousel thing, it just takes a little bit of preparation on the kids' part. Usually it's a nice way to follow up an assignment that they might have the night before to then get them in and discussing it.
What's the general definition of intelligence that helps us understand all the details? Right.
High school psychology teacher Milt Coons assessed his students' understanding about the meaning of intelligence by using the popsicle stick's formative assessment strategy. Milt allowed his students to randomly call on each other by using the popsicle sticks.
We were in our psychology class talking about intelligence because we just read an article, and Mr. Coons put all of our names on popsicle sticks and he put them in a cup. And what he would do was he would ask for volunteers, start it off, that person would pick out the popsicle stick and give some information about the article. And that next person would pick out another popsicle stick and read the name, and then the next person would stand up and so on and so forth.
Some animals are a lot smarter than others, like border collies and dolphins and primates.
Okay, why?
Their brains are a lot bigger.
Okay, in some cases, but the blue whale's brain is the largest brain in the world, and we don't see that as particularly intelligent. They get hunted down a lot, they can't eat different foods, they can't swim, or they don't choose to swim in different areas. So I don't know about the adaptation, but there is something about brain size and intelligence. What could it be?
Brain size compared to body mass.
That's it, that's a better statement, good deal.
You have to keep on your toes, definitely, because you don't want to repeat any information that anybody says, and then Mr. Coons will kind of like hound you for more information, which it's fun. It's a little lengthy with a bit of a bigger class, so maybe smaller classes would be better. But I enjoy it. It's fun. It's interesting.
I learned that forgetting is never remembering.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and what kind of stood out about that? Can you apply it? Can you remember a time?
I always say I forget, and it never occurred to me that I just never remember.
I think it definitely shows what students know the material and what students don't, just basically because you can see how in depth they understand it, and if they give general knowledge, then Mr. Coons should kind of have a little red flag saying, oh, they probably don't know it as well as these students, and that way he can elaborate more on it.
Music savants, counting savants, here's Beethoven perfectly out in all the notes, and then say, okay, turn Beethoven into a ragtime. They can't do it. They don't have that adaptation piece, and back to adaptation and using learned skills and inherited skills. Right, good, excellent.
This was a very good way to, you're not exactly putting that person on the spot every time, just having them say one thing and then sit down, so it was a very effective way of keeping the entire class engaged in the conversation.
Keeping students on their toes and engaged in the classroom is a plus for any teacher, but for Milt, an active classroom, well, it makes his day.
Oh, yay! I strive to be that at any given day.
The Hatboro-Horsham School District wishes to thank all the high school teachers who participated in this formative assessment exercise.